Maharshi's Gospel, The Teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi, Book 1. Work and Renunciation. The work may suffer if I do not attend to it. Attending to the self means attending to the work. Because you identify yourself with the body, you think that work is done by you. But the body and its activities, including that work, are not apart from the self. What does it matter whether you attend to the work or not? Suppose you walk from one place to another. You do not attend to the steps you take, yet you find yourself after a time at your goal. You see how the business of walking goes on without your attending to it. So also with other kinds of work. Is it then like sleepwalking? Like somnambulism? Quite so. When a child is fast asleep, his mother feeds him. The child eats the food just as well when he is fully awake. But the next morning he says to the mother, "Mother, I did not take any food last night." The mother and others know that he did, but he says that he did not. He was not aware. Still the action has gone on. A traveler in a cart has fallen asleep. The bulls move, stands, or are unyoked during the journey. He does not know these events, but finds himself in a different place after he wakes up. He has been blissfully ignorant of the occurrences on the way, but the journey has been finished. Similarly, the self of a person, the ever-wakeful self, is compared to the traveler asleep in the cart. The waking state is the moving of the bulls. Samadhi is their standing still, because samadhi means jagrat sushupti. That is to say, the person is aware but not concerned in the action. The bulls are yoked but do not move. Sleep is the unyoking of the bulls, for there is complete stopping of activity corresponding to the relief of the bulls from the yoke. Or again, take the instance of the cinema. Scenes are projected on the screen in the cinema show, but the moving pictures do not affect or alter the screen. The spectator pays attention to them, not to the screen. They cannot exist apart from the screen, yet the screen is ignored. So also the self is the screen where the pictures, activities, etc. are seen going on. The man is aware of the latter, but not aware of the essential former. All the same, the world of pictures is not apart from the self. Whether he is aware of the screen or unaware, the actions will continue. The distinction between sleep, Kevalya Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and Sahasha Nirvikalpa Samadhi can be clearly put into a tabular form. The mind of the sage who has realized the self is wholly destroyed. It is dead. But to the onlooker he may seem to possess a mind just like the layman. Hence the I in the sage has merely an apparent objective reality. In fact, however, it has neither a subjective existence nor an objective reality. Mind control. Other thoughts arise more forcibly when one attempts meditation. Yes, all kinds of thoughts arise in meditation. That is only right, for what lies hidden in you is brought out. Unless it rises up, how can it be destroyed? Thoughts rise up spontaneously, as it were, but only to be extinguished in due course, thus strengthening the mind. How can the rebellious mind be made calm and tranquil? Either see its source, so that it may disappear, or surrender yourself, so that it may be struck down. Self-surrender is the same as self-knowledge, and either of them necessarily implies self-control. The ego submits only when it recognizes the higher power. How is Guru found? God, who is immanent, in his grace, takes pity on the loving devotee and manifests himself according to the devotee's development. The devotee thinks that he is a man and expects a relationship as between two physical bodies. But the Guru, who is God or the Self incarnate, works from within, helps the man to see the error of his ways, and guides him in the right path until he realizes the Self within. How can I obtain grace? Grace is the Self. That also is not to be acquired. You only need to know that it exists. The sun is brightness only. It does not see darkness. Yet you speak of darkness fleeing on the sun's approach. So also the devotee's ignorance, like the phantom of darkness, vanishes at the look of the Guru. You are surrounded by sunlight. Yet if you would see the sun, you must turn in its direction and look at it. So also grace is found by the proper approach you make, though it is here and now. Cannot grace hasten ripeness in the seeker? Leave it all to the Master. Surrender to him without reserve. One of two things must be done. Either surrender yourself because you realize your inability and need a higher power to help you, or investigate into the cause of misery. Go into the source and so merge in the Self. Either way you will be free from misery. God or Guru never forsakes the devotee who has surrendered himself. Self-inquiry. But is it not funny that the I should be searching for the I? Does not the inquiry, who am I, turn out in the end an empty formula? Or am I to put the question to myself endlessly, repeating it like some mantra? Self-inquiry is certainly not an empty formula. It is more than repetition of any mantra. If the inquiry, who am I, were a mere mental questioning, it would not be of much value. The very purpose of self-inquiry is to focus the entire mind at its source. It is not, therefore, a case of one eye searching for another eye. Much less is self-inquiry an empty formula, for it involves an intense activity of the entire mind to keep it steadily poised in pure self-awareness. Self-inquiry is the one infallible means, the only direct one to realize the unconditioned absolute being that you really are. The heart is the Self. Sri Bhagavan speaks of the heart as the seat of consciousness and as identical with the Self. What does the heart exactly signify? The question about the heart arises because you are interested in seeking the source of consciousness. To all deep-thinking minds, the inquiry about the I and its nature has an irresistible fascination. Call it by any name, God, Self, the heart, or the seat of consciousness. It is all the same. The point to be grasped is this, that heart means the very core of one's being, the center, without which there is nothing whatever. But Sri Bhagavan has specified a particular place for the heart within the physical body that is in the chest, 2 digits to the right from the meridian. Yes, that is the center of spiritual experience according to the testimony of sages. The spiritual heart center is quite different from the blood-propelling muscular organ known by the same name. The spiritual heart center is not an organ of the body. All that you can say of the heart is that it is the very core of your being, that which you are really identical, as the word in Sanskrit literally means. Whether you are awake, asleep, or dreaming, whether you are engaged in work or immersed in samadhi. In that case, how can it be localized in any part of the body? Fixing a place for the heart would imply setting physiological limitations to that which is beyond space and time. That is right, but the person who puts the question about the position of the heart considers himself as existing with or in the body. While putting the question now, would you say that your body alone is here, but that you are speaking from somewhere else? No. You accept your bodily existence. It is from this point of view that any reference to a physical body comes to be made. Truly speaking, pure consciousness is without form. It is without parts. It has no form and shape, no within and without. There is no right or left for it. Pure consciousness, which is the heart, includes all, and nothing is outside or apart from it. That is the ultimate truth. From this absolute standpoint, the heart, self, or consciousness can have no particular place assigned to it in the physical body. What is the reason? The body is itself a mere projection of the mind, and the mind is but a poor reflection of the radiant heart. How can that in which everything is contained be itself confined as a tiny part within the physical body, which is but an infinitesimal phenomenal manifestation of the one reality? But people do not understand this. They cannot help thinking in terms of physical body in the world. For instance, you say, I have come to the ashram all the way from my country beyond the Himalayas. But that is not true. Where is there a coming or going or any movement whatever for the one all-pervading spirit which you really are? You are where you have always been. It is your body that has moved or was conveyed from place to place till it reached this ashram. This is the simple truth. But to a person who considers himself a subject living in an objective world, it appears as something altogether visionary. It is by coming down to the level of the ordinary understanding that a place is assigned to the heart in the physical body. How then shall I understand Sri Bhagavan's statement that the experience of the heart center is at the particular place in the chest? Once you accept that from the true and absolute standpoint, the heart as pure consciousness is beyond space and time, it will be easy for you to understand the rest in its correct perspective. It is only on that basis that I have put the question about the position of the heart. I am asking about Sri Bhagavan's experience. Pure consciousness, wholly unrelated to the physical body and transcending the mind, is a matter of direct experience. Sages know their bodiless, eternal existence, just as the layman knows his bodily existence. But the experience of consciousness can be with bodily awareness as well as without it. In the bodiless experience of pure consciousness, the sage is beyond time and space, and no question about the position of the heart can then at all arise. Since, however, the physical body cannot subsist with life apart from consciousness, bodily awareness has to be sustained by pure consciousness. The former, by its nature, is limited and can never be coextensive with the latter, which is infinite and eternal. Body consciousness is merely a monad-like miniature reflection of the pure consciousness with which the sage has realized his identity. For him, therefore, body consciousness is only a reflected ray, as it were, of the self-effulgent infinite consciousness which is himself. It is in this sense alone that the sage is aware of his bodily existence. Since during the bodiless experience of the heart as pure consciousness, the sage is not at all aware of the body. That absolute experience is localized by him within the limits of the physical body by a sort of feeling recollection made while he is with bodily awareness, aham and aham vritti. How can any inquiry initiated by the ego reveal its own unreality? The ego's phenomenal existence is transcended when you sink into the source wherefrom arises the aham vritti. But is not the aham vritti only one of the three forms in which the ego manifests itself? Yoga Vasishta and other ancient texts describe the ego as having a threefold form. It is so. The ego is described as having three bodies: the gross, the subtle, and the causal. But that is only for the purposes of analytical exposition. If the method of inquiry were to depend on the ego's form, you may take it that any inquiry would become altogether impossible, because the forms the ego may assume are legion. Therefore, for purposes of jnana vichara, you have to proceed on the basis that the ego has but one form, namely that of aham vritti. But it may prove inadequate for realizing jnana. Self-inquiry, by following the clue of aham vritti, is just like the dog tracing its master by his scent. The master may be at some distant, unknown place, but that does not at all stand in the way of the dog tracing him. The master's scent is an infallible clue for the animal, and nothing else, such as the dress he wears or his build and stature, etc., counts. To that scent the dog holds on undistractedly while searching for him, and finally it succeeds in tracing him. Likewise, in your quest for the self, the one infallible clue is the aham vritti, the I amness, which is the primary datum of your experience. No other clue can lead you direct to self-realization. The question still remains, why the quest for the source of aham vritti, as distinguished from other vrittis, should be considered the direct means to self-realization? The word aham is itself very suggestive. The two letters of the word, namely a and ha, are the first and last letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. The suggestion intended to be conveyed by the word is that it comprises all. How? Because aham signifies existence itself. Although the concept of I-ness or I amness is by usage known as aham vritti, it is not really a vritti like other vrittis of the mind, because like the other vrittis which have no essential interrelation, the aham vritti is equally and essentially related to each and every vritti of the mind. Without the aham vritti, there can be no other vritti, but the aham vritti can subsist by itself without depending on any other vritti of the mind. The aham vritti is therefore fundamentally different from the other vrittis. So then, the search for the source of aham vritti is not merely the search for the basis of one of the forms of the ego, but for the very source itself, from which arises the I amness. In other words, the quest for and the realization of the source of the ego in the form of aham vritti necessarily implies the transcendence of the ego in every one of its possible forms. Conceding that the aham vritti essentially comprises all the forms of the ego, why should that vritti alone be chosen as the means for self-inquiry? Because it is the one irreducible datum of your experience. Because seeking its source is the only practicable course you can adopt to realize the self. The ego is said to have a causal body, But how can you make it the subject of your investigation? When the ego adopts that form, you are immersed in the darkness of sleep. But is not the ego in its subtle and causal forms too intangible to be tackled through the inquiry into the source of ahamvritti, conducted while the mind is awake? No, the inquiry into the source of ahamvritti touches the very existence of the ego. Therefore, the subtlety of the ego's form is not a material consideration. While the one aim is to realize the unconditioned, pure being of the self, which is in no way dependent on the ego, how can inquiry pertaining to the ego in the form of ahamvritti be of any use? From the functional point of view, the form, activity, or whatever else you may call it, it is immaterial, since it is evanescent. The ego has one and only one characteristic. The ego functions as the knot between the self, which is the pure consciousness, and the physical body, which is inert and insentient. The ego is therefore called the Chit Jata Granthi. In your investigation into the source of ahamvritti, you take the essential Chit aspect of the ego, and for this reason, the inquiry must lead to the realization of the pure consciousness of the self. Silence and solitude. How then can we communicate our thoughts to one another? That becomes necessary if the sense of duality exists. Why does not Bhagavan go about and preach the truth to the people at large? How do you know I am not doing it? Does preaching consist in mounting a platform and haranguing the people around? Preaching is simply communication of knowledge. It can really be done in silence only. What do you think of a man who listens to a sermon for an hour and goes away without having been impressed by it so as to change his life? Compare him with another who sits in the holy presence and goes away after some time with his outlook on life totally changed. Which is better, to preach loudly without effect, or to sit silently, sending out inner force? Again, how does speech arise? There is abstract knowledge, whence arises the ego, which in turn gives rise to thought, and thought to the spoken word. So the word is the great-grandson of the original source. If the word can produce effect, judge for yourself. How much more powerful must be the preaching through silence? But people do not understand this simple bare truth, the truth of their everyday, ever-present, eternal presence. This truth is that of the self. Is there anyone unaware of the self? But they do not like even to hear of this truth, whereas they are eager to know what lies beyond, about heaven, hell, and reincarnation. Because they love mystery and not the truth, religions cater to them so as eventually to bring them round to the self. Whatever be the means adopted, you must at last return to the self. So why not abide in the self here and now? To be a spectator of or to speculate about the other world, the self is necessary. Therefore, they are not different from the self. Even the ignorant man, when he sees the objects, sees only the self.